liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, go from
Well, thank you, Andrew, and welcome to the June 12, 2019 edition of Space News. This is Peter Auld, and once again I've got the full team here, Tina Stagg, Michael Abdullah and Angelo DeGrazia with me, all from the Space Association. And we're going to go straight over to Angelo. What's happening over there, Angelo?
Okay, thanks, Peter. Let's talk about US space policy. There are probably some frantic emails flying between NASA headquarters and the White House right now. In a tweet late last week, President Donald Trump appeared to signal a lack of support for NASA's current push to put people on the moon in the 2020s. A push that he officially kicked off in December 2017 with the signing of Space Policy Directive 1, or SPD 1, and backed with a proposed funding increase just last month. The president tweeted, "For all of the money we are spending, NASA should not be talking about going to the moon. We did that 50 years ago. They should be focused on the much bigger things we are doing, including Mars, of which the moon is part, defence and science." SPD-1 directs NASA to establish a long-term, sustainable presence on and around the moon and to use the experience gained in this effort to reach the ultimate human spaceflight destination, Mars. So, the somewhat confused latter part of the president's tweet, calling the moon a part of Mars, may be a reference to the horizon goal laid out in SPD-1. NASA has organised its crewed lunar plans into a program called Artemis, which includes the construction of a small moon-orbiting space station known as the Gateway. The space agency initially targeted the late 20s for the first crewed lunar landing since the end of the Apollo era, but the timeline was recently moved up significantly when in March, Vice President Mike Pence instructed NASA to make it happen by 2024. Only last month, Trump proposed giving NASA an extra $1.6 billion in 2020 to help achieve this ambitious goal. It's unclear at the moment if Trump's tweet represents a substantial shift in thinking at the White House about NASA's goal and direction. And this ambiguity has spurred some in the spaceflight community to call on the president to explain fully what he means. Wow. Okay, over to you, Pete.
Moving on to other NASA news, NASA is planning a new approach to resolving a problem with an instrument on the InSight Mars lander. The Heat Flow and Physics Properties package includes a probe, or mole, designed to hammer its way into the surface to a depth of 5 metres, but has since been stuck just 30 centimetres below the surface for 3 months. NASA said last week that it will use the lander's robotic arm to carefully lift up the instrument's support structure and take images of the area around the mole. The arm could also be used to press down on the surface, allowing the mole to gain traction against the surrounding soil so that it can continue burrowing into the surface. Mike, what's happening?
Thanks, Peter. Let's look at China. China successfully launched a small rocket from a ship in the Yellow Sea last week. A Long March 11 rocket launched from the ship and placed a total of 7 small satellites into 600-kilometre orbits. The launch was intended to demonstrate the ability of the solid propellant rocket to launch at sea, allowing it to place satellites into lower inclination orbits than possible from sites within China. China's first sea launch gives the country new flexibility in providing launch services. Analysts say that the ability to launch from a platform, rather than be constrained by existing launch sites within China, fits into wider developments, with the small launch industry as a whole trending toward offering more flexible launch solutions. And on to Japan. Japan's Hayabusa 2 spacecraft is preparing for another possible touch-and-go sampling attempt of the asteroid Ryugu. The spacecraft approached within 10 metres of the asteroid last week and successfully dropped a target marker near where it deployed an explosive impactor in April, creating a small crater. That marker would guide the spacecraft on a later approach where it would come down to the surface to collect material for later return to Earth. But mission managers have yet to approve that sampling attempt, as it does pose some risk to the spacecraft, which collected samples from elsewhere on the asteroid earlier this year. And back to you, Peter.
Okay, we'll whiz up to Canada now. A proposed Canadian spaceport has won environmental approval. Nova Scotia's Environmental Department announced last week that it approved a plan by Maritime Launch Services to build a site for launches of Ukrainian Cyclone 4 rockets. The approval comes with a number of conditions, including development of how the company would deal with worst-case scenarios in the event of a launch accident, as well as other environmental protection plans. The company hopes to conduct a ceremonial groundbreaking of the launch site next month. And Angelo.
Okay, let's go across the border. SpaceX. SpaceX, by one estimate, is now more valuable than Elon Musk's other company, Tesla. Industry sources estimated that after the latest funding rounds by SpaceX recently disclosed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the company is valued at $33.3 billion. By comparison, publicly traded Tesla has a market cap of $32.7 billion based on its stock price at the close of trading last week. That's good. More money for rockets. Great. Okay, Tina.
Thanks, Angelo, and good evening, space fans. To Virgin Galactic and Orbit news, Virgin Orbit has filed a suit against OneWeb over failing to pay a termination fee for cancelled launch contracts. According to a complaint Virgin Orbit filed last week in the US District Court for the Southern District of New York, OneWeb quietly cancelled 35 of a planned 39 launches last June, triggering a $70 million termination fee. Virgin Orbit says OneWeb still owes $46.32 million. According to the complaint, OneWeb maintains that it doesn't owe Virgin Orbit any money for cancelling the launches, but the company declined to comment on the suit. The UK government will fund development of spaceport facilities at a British airport to allow it to host Virgin Orbit. The UK Space Agency and a local government will spend up to $25 million on facilities and operational capabilities at Cornwall Airport Newquay, also known as Spaceport Cornwall. That investment will allow the airport to host Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1 air launch system for missions starting in the early 2020s. The company previously signed an agreement with the airport to study operating from there and also plans to invest in the site. Virgin Orbit is planning to operate from Japan as well. Company founder Richard Branson said last week Virgin Orbit will partner with Japan's ANA Holdings to operate out of an airport in the country. The companies will work with an organisation called Spaceport Japan to identify a suitable airport in the country for operations, but didn't say when launch operations could begin there. And turning to Strato launch, as recently predicted here on Space News, the end may be near for Strato launch, the company founded by the late Paul Allen to develop a giant air launch system. Sources within the company say owner Vulcan Inc. is considering selling off the company's intellectual property and other assets, including the giant aircraft it built. The plane, intended to serve as an air launch platform, made its first and to date only flight in April. An official company spokesman said Strato launch remained operational and had no announcement about its future. And in thrilling news for Apollo program tragics, astronomers believe they have found the lunar module from the Apollo 10 mission, 5 decades after it was released into space by the crew. The module, measuring just 4 metres wide, was named Snoopy and was believed to have been lost after it was jettisoned. Snoopy was used as part of a practice run for the Apollo 11 lunar landing in July 1969, 2 months after Apollo 10's flight in May of that year. 2 of the 3 astronauts transferred into Snoopy to fly above the moon's surface. They then returned to the command module Charlie Brown. After demonstrating the docking manoeuvre, Snoopy was shot off past the moon into a heliocentric orbit. Nick Howes, said he is certain Snoopy has been found and all they need is someone to go and retrieve it. Howes said he began the search for the module in 2011 and calculated the odds of finding it were 235 million to 1. He and a team of astronomers analysed terabytes of radar data and in 2018 found what they believe is Snoopy.
Thanks, Tina. And to other news. Astronomers may not be happy with SpaceX's Starlink satellites, but there's little they can do about them for now. Early last week, the International Astronomical Union called for the creation of a regulatory framework to mitigate or eliminate the detrimental impacts of satellites like Starlink, which could interfere with both visual and radio astronomy as they move across the sky. The visual impact of Starlink has particularly bothered astronomers when the satellites initially appeared as a bright train of objects in the night sky after launch last month. However, nothing in current licensing and regulatory practices in the US covers the appearance of satellites, leaving astronomers with little recourse other than a lawsuit that legal experts say would likely fail. As reported here on Space News last week, SpaceX executives have said they're working on ways to mitigate any harmful effects their satellites cause to astronomers. A US Senate bill seeks to protect the Apollo 11 landing site. The One Small Step to Protect Human Heritage in Space Act, introduced by Senators Ted Cruz, Republican Texas, and Gary Peters, Democrat Michigan, last month, would direct federal agencies that issues licenses for outer space activities to require licensees to protect that landing site. The bill is the latest in a series of legislative proposals and other efforts to protect historic sites on the Moon, while working within the limitations of the Outer Space Treaty, which prevents nations from claiming territory on the Moon or other celestial bodies. Okay, over to you, Peter.
All right, a new series debuting this coming spring will examine an alternative history of the space race. Apple released last week the first trailer of For All Mankind, a series that will appear on the company's new Apple TV Plus service. The series will be based on an alternative history where the Soviet Union, and not the United States, was the first to land a man on the Moon, prompting NASA to redouble its efforts. And with more Hollywood news or fictional news, Brad Pitt is going to space. Well, in his latest movie anyway. The first trailer for Ad Astra, released last week, features Pitt as an astronaut asked to find his missing father, Tommy Lee Jones, in the far reaches of the solar system, with the fate of the Earth somehow in the balance. The movie, also starring Donald Sutherland and Liv Tyler, is scheduled for release on September 20. I can't wait. Well, anyway, that's it for this week's Space News. Thank you, everybody, and it's back to you, Andrew.